In this video, we're going to draw Link from The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Now, there's a lot of different Links out there to draw. Over the years, the costume has changed quite a bit, and especially with the current crop of games, you can kind of, make the character who you want and change the costume. But I liked this design that has kind of surfaced on the internet recently that I think will be a really, really good challenge to draw. So we can, look at how to draw drapery, how to think about these different costume elements. There's a lot of little patterns, little tricks to this that I think might be actually a really fun character to draw. I think it's well designed, it's got a nice balance, and again, should be a good way to practice some drawing. As I often say on this channel, I'm not a huge fan of doing fan art, but we can still learn a lot from drawing characters that do exist. We can both study their design, and knowing what we're meant to draw is actually a really good way to, practice our structural drawing, our foundational principles. So that's a big part of what I want to do in this video. We'll break down the character from an anatomical, stylistic standpoint. I'll use a little bit of my own style, but try and, customize it to, the general feel that we have in the game. And then we'll look at the costume details, how we think about drawing the drapery, all of that stuff. This should be a fun one, so let's jump in and get started. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name's Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, playing a lot of these games when I was very young, I think really did give me both an appreciation for the line and color style and also just this kind of weird mix of old school fantasy with, a little bit more of an exaggeration, right? This wasn't kind of just knights in shining armor. There was all these other cool characters, all this sort of amazing, really sort of mystical, magical stuff that happened in Zelda. I think it had a huge sort of impact on me. And, I always remember looking at the art and in the instruction booklet, because again, for people who aren't super old, you might not understand how important these illustrations were to the gaming experience, because we'd be playing, a relatively simple game visually, and you'd kind of be looking in the instruction booklet to kind of really help you understand what a lot of these sort of graphics meant, and get images of the world in more detail, images of the monsters and the potions and all that kind of stuff. So I would often be looking at these instruction manuals and looking at these video game supplementary visual materials, and that really is a big part of what got me into wanting to be an artist, right? And subsequently I became a professional artist. I've drawn a lot of comic books, and a lot of it comes back to this kind of simple line and color style. If you look closely, you can see a lot of the JRPG and, Japanese sort of manga influence in my work. Again, typically I'm drawing comic books and concept art, etc. And if you want to learn a little bit more about, how I do what I do, working in the line and color style, again, I use Photoshop to create all of my comic book projects. And that's very much based on a lot of the old sort of Capcom, Nintendo, Japanese RPG art that I saw, right? That's kind of just what I always wanted to do. If you want to, learn how I do this, you can check out my free quick start guide. I've got this created so that you can get up and running quickly in Photoshop, developing your own simple, reliable line and color style and process. It's free. The link will be in the description. But anyway, let's go draw some Zelda/Link. Now, again, there's a lot of different Links we could draw, and I want to try, the sort of classic Link as well at some point. The one that kind of struck me, though, was this design from Tears of the Kingdom. And I think this is a really sort of fun little design. So let's have a go at drawing this one. All right, so if we look at this character design, I think it offers us a couple of really fun things to draw, which is a bit of drapery. We do need to dial in the anatomy because we can actually see some of the figure there. And a couple of little tricks we can have for drawing all these extra little details. What I normally like to start with is just the feeling of what the initial character is like. So in this case, it's good to think about how this character relates to a standard anatomical figure. So if we look at our typical little mannequin style figure that is based off a skeleton, right, we might have something a little bit like this. Now, a lot of this depends on style, right? Like how we actually want to interpret this. But I think to get the nature of the character, it's important to understand that Link is normally portrayed as, you know, a boyish figure. He has like a boyish sort of adolescent, athletic figure, and that's like a big part of his character. Very serious, and I think it's often that juxtaposition of his seriousness with his sort of youth that gives him a lot of character, right? It's a very sort of evocative mix of things. So what we want to do is think about, okay, here's our standardized mannequin little stick figure. And this is what we would consider to be a normal set of proportions, maybe. Again, normal, right, in quotes. What we need to think about is, okay, what's going to change about this? Not a lot, but typically we're going to see the hands are a little bit bigger to give it that cartoony feel. The head is going to be a little bit bigger. Obviously, if we were to draw the face, there's features that will change proportion. It's always a good idea to think about how, you know, if we're making something look a little bit more cartoony or a little bit more manga or / anime, like, even though that's a sort of a gross oversimplification, I think it can be useful. Often what's happening is we're elongating the legs a little bit more. So I'm going to try and keep, again, his sort of frame fairly small. He is going to have shoulders that come out a little bit more. Bonk. And if anything, we're gonna try and make the legs a little bit longer. So these changes are going to be very subtle. A lot of it is just going to be keeping the frame kind of compact, making it feel athletic but not hyper aggressive in any way. And then we're just going to build costumes onto that. So if we think about this as being a little bit more boyish / athletic, that's kind of how I view it. And again, you know, that's just how I sort of record the character. There's not a lot of that sort of broadness, and I think that's important if we're going to get the character feeling right from a drawing perspective. So there's obviously how we emotionally draw it, how we, you know, go about, you know, solving the problems and, you know, like drawing the features and getting it to feel right. But there's a lot of structural anatomy that actually goes into helping us with that. So what I'm going to do is, let's just pick a big, you know, relatively big sort of space here that we can draw this character. And I'm going to try and break this down very simply from a proportional standpoint. So typically when we are breaking the figure down, we break it in half around about the bottom of the pelvis, and you see that is pretty well represented in the skeleton, right? So that, right, let's put it this way, that is kind of equal to that, let's say, right? That pretty equal. So we use the same idea, but maybe we make the legs a little bit longer. Now, with a lot of typical anatomical markers, what we do is we would sort of have the head up here. We would have the torso kind of here somewhere, with the rib cage coming in, yeah, around about this marker here, right? We have the pelvic bone here, etc. So we kind of got to massage that a little bit, but a lot of this, as I said, is based on style. So what I'm always going to do as a first step is just to rough it in. And that really means less than sort of thinking about structure and what goes where. What I want to start doing is just kind of say, well, look, if I kind of put this stuff in, is it going to take up the space in a nice way? And normally I do this really light, but it would be quite hard to see. It might not be picked up by the camera, so I'm often drawing these steps a little bit, right? A little bit darker than I normally would. So let's think about if we drop a center line down here, let's make sure his legs are a little bit further out. And this is where drawing the initial sort of just like, okay, where is everything, is a really good way to start, because it means that what you typically will get is a good place to begin. So yeah, just start to warm up, right? We can be a little bit more sketchy with this stage. This is how I'm kind of figuring out, okay, where is this character? What is going on? Boom. I think we need some broader shoulders, a little bit more athletic, and probably, yeah, a slightly bigger face to make that more athletic build feel more cartoony. So again, thinking about this. Right, where's the bottom of the rib cage? Yeah, maybe somewhere here. So we've got our elbow at the bottom of the rib cage. We've got our hand here. So we're still working very much in normal proportion. I'm going to put his arm up here because that will allow us to look at that costume detail. Now this is pre-structure. Mostly what I'm trying to do is think about where the character is in space. And what I'll do after that is go in and then have another go. But let's just think about, maybe let's put this arm out a bit over here, and then we'll think about the sword, and maybe we'll put the fancy sword he has there just for fun. All right. So again, this is just a rough idea of what is going to happen. So you can at this stage start to rough in costume details and do a similar thing, but the way I think is a really good way to practice is to think about the character unclothed first, because this will keep us honest. Now, a really good step at this stage is to check, right? Right? Check the drawing, and that means I'm going to try and look at it more front on, which again is not the best from a demo perspective because it's hard to see that. And I'm just going to try and check a lot of these center lines and try and see if I can find this form. So I'm going to really try and make sure that, look, where is the horizon line? And what this is about is just thinking about, right, if there was a perspective grid here, where would that go? Don't really need reference for the moment because we're just going to be drawing some anatomy. Typically when I'm doing this, I'm going to try and put the horizon line around about the pelvis area. That gives us some good dimension. It means we're looking up at the character a little bit. Now, that might not be what you want. You might be wanting to put the horizon line a little bit more at the shoulder, because that means that, hey, it's a little bit easier to see the character, on a more sort of face-to-face level. Feels a little bit less intimidating. But either way, that's one of the things I'm going to try and do at this stage of the drawing. And again, I'll do that tilted up so that we can really see it here, and just make sure that I'm looking at it front on. Boom. Right, got all that stuff working, and that feels okay to me. So the next thing I'm going to do is try and track the center of this torso area. And again, you know, does that actually line up with this line that I've dropped down here to the bottom? And are my feet equidistant from the center line, right? That gives us a nice balanced look. All of these things will help. So he's looking pretty tall at the moment. A big part of that is the size of the head from a proportional standpoint. I think where he's going to end up looking, yeah, I think he's going to end up looking fine, but we'll see. And also hands will be a bit bigger. So I've kind of done the check, and what I'm going to focus on next is structure. So we're going to try and build out these forms. Let me just position that a bit better. Try and build out some of these forms. And I'll keep it sort of rough. Don't need to try and make a fancy drawing. Again, just doing standard, you know, pose, nothing too fancy, because this helps us understand the character, the costume. I can do some posing demos another time, perhaps. Let's get rid of some of these older limbs, though. Boom, boom. All right, so here we got a hand. It's going to be somewhere there. Look, does that work? Next, I'm going to think about just massing in some of these primary forms. So as part of structure, find our primary form. I've got the masses of the shoulders, got the mass of the torso, mass of the head. Again, let's think about where the center line of that head is, where the brow is going to be. Right, we're going to have a nose here, cheekbones there, drop the center line of the there, and we're going to have a face, boom, roughly around there. Again, there's going to be hair that comes down, and I always really like to put some of that, just subtle indications of that, so that I feel the space. So it's often a mix of structure, what I need, and me just kind of thinking, okay, look, is that going to work? Okay. So again, let's just go through and try and do as much of this as possible. Let's make these hands a bit bigger. Right. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, 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 boom. All right, and let's put in some masses for the legs. So the pelvis here is a pretty complicated form. If we look at the skeletal model, there's all this stuff here. What I like to do is try and simplify it into the idea of just two plates that are kind of facing each other. And by plates, I mean like dinner plates, right? So we've sort of got a plate here, right, and a plate here. And even though it's more complicated, that to me always makes it a lot easier to simplify. So this relationship between the torso, boom, 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 where we're thinking about the spine, the twist of the spine, and how that connects to the pelvis and the head is really important. It's a major aspect of what makes the character feel as if they are grounded. So the way to kind of think about this is that we're thinking about maybe like a center line, right? Sorry, that's a bit hard to see. We're thinking about a center line, but you see that the spine curves around that center line. So a big part of drawing in general is being able to understand and appreciate these things. So I've got the front of that rib cage that's coming that way, right? As I said, I'm sort of tracking how that might drop down to the bottom of the pelvis there. And I'm also thinking about, okay, I've got this skull mass here, and at the back of that, I'm going to have the spine come down here, and then it's going to curve around. So what I'm thinking about is drawing through, right? We can imagine that we have this sphere of the torso, and we're creating dimensionality. We're thinking about where the form might wrap around, and then we're also drawing through. So not just contour lines around, but I'm thinking about, okay, here's the spine, right? And I'm thinking about this form as it comes down here. I'm tracking it in my mind. I can see where that line would come along the center. And then I'm sort of thinking about, yeah, but this one that goes around the back is coming around here. And I'm sort of thinking about where the center line is. Or if we just drop a center line all the way through, right, you kind of see how the spine relates to that, right? So at some point the spine is going to come down here, and it's kind of going to meet back up with that center line, if that makes sense. So the structure we're thinking about is this, right, and this, and how that connects. And then what I'm doing is, again, I'm sort of thinking about, well, where are the sides of that torso? I can think about ribs going here. Where are the sides? Let's draw some plates. I know it's silly, but always helps me to remember it, right? And then we've got this little line here, and that's where these connect up. And then I've got most of the structure, right? This comes around, and then I've got a pretty good understanding of where that is. So what we're trying to do is represent this curve. So if we think about this in an exaggerated diagrammatic view, when we see the torso, often, yeah, we just kind of see this blob from the side, but it's really important. And again, same with the neck, right? We often just sort of see a neck like this, but the spine and the way it curves is really important. So that's a lot of what I'm trying to track here. Now, the first few times you do this, this sort of will break your brain a bit, right? And seems like a huge waste of time. The more you get sort of experience playing around with these ideas, the easier it becomes to just kind of put in a few marks and really kind of get most of what you need. Once I've got this idea here, it gives me a real key for where I'm going to find the top of the hips, where the ball of the hip is going to be. And then as I start to mass in and add a little bit of structure to the legs, it's going to feel as if, look, these random just big muscles that I'm putting in, right? These big balloons are going to make a lot more sense. And again, we don't want to go crazy with the legs. I'm going to do that idea again. I feel like, yeah, maybe I'm making him a bit tall. We'll see. Again, a lot of that is going to kind of come down to how big the face is. So again, normally at this point, let's check. So rotate this around. Again, have a look. And yeah, I can see that, yeah, just getting that center line right for the character. Maybe again making the character's head a little bit bigger. Just roughing all these things in. making sure we don't have any weird anatomical bits and pieces that are throwing us off. So there's my center. I feel like this shoulder could be a little bit bigger. Yeah. Let's see there. Let's see what happens once we put all these kind of clothes on. All right. So again, this is giving me a pretty good understanding of the structure. If we think about where these feet are, I'm going to draw the heel of the foot at the bottom and then try and connect up the ball of the foot to that. And that's going to give me a pretty good indication of what's going where. I think it'd be good to get these hands bigger. That's going to help us with the idea of him being a little bit more cartoony. Next, what I'll do is really think about where these pectoral muscles are. Now I've got most of the other sort of structures that I need. Boom. Have some lats coming down there. And yeah, think about where that center is. Boom, boom. There we go. All right. So again, got some decent sort of anatomy there. Again, you know, it's in my style a little bit, right? I'm not trying to make it look like official kind of Nintendo artwork or anything like that. But that gets us most of the anatomy blocked in. So what we've got to think about next is how this costume works. All right. So we basically have a belt, right, that's going around here. So the first thing I'm going to do is think about the primary form of these costume details. So we've got this going along here. Then it seems like we have this kind of sack style bit of clothing, right, that's kind of coming here. Boom. And then it's hard to tell, but from this viewpoint, it does feel like it's important to look at the other elements of the costume where we have the pants coming up. So the pants are going to mean that this belt that's on top, right, it's not necessarily a belt, it's just a thing that's tucking it in, is going to be a little bit bigger than just the pure hips. I think this is a really key point to get. So we've got that, we've got this coming over, and it feels like, again, it's coming over a little bit more, so it's hanging over. And then if we think about some major structural elements to it, it has some form. So if we think about going back to first principles, primary form, right, here we've got boom, pectorals, deltoids, and then we've got this thing. So what I'm trying to get is just like the primary folds that we can add to. Now this looks like it's a little bit more sort of complicated than that, but what I'm trying to get is this kind of feeling. And we'll obviously try and make it look a little bit better as we go, but first things first, let's just make sure we're getting the breadth right. So the most important thing when we're looking at overlapping bits of clothes is making sure that we don't put any detail in, but then realize we've got to move it. That really is the key, right, to all of this. Is just, I want to make sure that if I do add detail, you know, it's going to be in the right spot. So other thing is, if we look at this, this really is going, it's actually going a little bit more in here. All right, get rid of that. And it's actually this bit here that is coming over the top. And we can see that this bit, yeah, is really coming down here. It's going to come out, tuck in there. So again, just roughly putting these things in here. Now, what we can also do is rough in where this sort of t-shirt style sleeve is. Just rough at the moment. All right, next, let's think about these pants, because I do feel like both the pants from a rough perspective and these giant shoes slash boots slash things are going to be important, because that is what we're going to place our clothing here on top of. So if we think about, look, like, where is it? Well, one of the things that it does tell us is like, well, it's kind of at the bottom of the hand. So if we think about the hand, if it wasn't grabbing a sword, is about here. Then the knee is here. So it's kind of going to come, yeah, just above the knee. That's kind of what I want. But I need to figure out, look, how big is it? Well, let's think about adding these gigantic boots. All right, just massing in some forms that are going to be hopefully indicative of what we need. And again, once I've massed in the form, then I'm going to go through and add structure. But typically that's my process if I haven't drawn something before, is that I want to develop the rough placement, and then I'm going to go in and add structure. Right. Boom. So we're going to have, again, you can see there's some form being represented in the silhouette of these pants. And there's not that much room here. So these pants to me seem to really come up. Sorry, these boots seem to come up pretty high. Got to remember that as well. We do need to give ourselves plenty of room to draw these boots, because they do seem pretty big, right? It's not just me, but these do seem pretty chunky. And again, you know, maybe not the most interesting thing, but really good to practice drawing this kind of stuff, because if you are ever designing characters for video games, etc., yeah, really understanding how much, you know, how to kind of draw these kind of little patterns is really good. All right. So let's, again, that's probably enough here to think about what's happening. So what we've got is some more stretching of this cloth around here. And I'm not going to go crazy with it. It seems like it's sort of blending in with everything else, which is kind of weird. And again, the way that I would potentially draw this is to fake a lot of these things a little bit more, right? You know, you don't necessarily need to put in all these details, but I'm just trying to think about it from a demo perspective, right? Often less is more. All right. And here we're going to have this weird set of marks and things that the character has. We'll see whether we get to draw any of that. But let's think about where this arm is going from a directional standpoint. Okay. So you can see it's kind of coming together, but I think before we start doing detail, it is super worthwhile putting in as much of this other stuff as we can. Make sure we've got all of the elements accounted for. So that's being held down here. It's coming there. Boom. And then it seems like it's being split. Alright. Now, in terms of hair and ears, let's rough this in as well, because I think this will be sort of useful. Where do these ears go? They always seem like they're a little bit low, because everyone's elf ears are different. What's happening there? It feels like we're kind of starting below the eyes almost. I'm going to figure out by drawing a line across where those elf ears are going to end up there. It seems like they don't necessarily have giant, they kind of have a bit of this lobe, which is not necessarily what all elf ears have. Right, we've got our nose, and let's think about the eyes. Boom. And yeah, let's just put it rough in some primary form for the hair. We've got these crazy sort of 80s hairstyle bits that have made it through the years as an iconic part of the character. We've got a major chunky bit of hair coming here. Got another one here. And this is going to give us that general boom, boom structure that we need. Right, hair in the face. Something like that. Now obviously there's some other form to this that we can add, we can sort of plus that, but that's sort of giving us a bit of what we need. Now, for me, it's at this point that the character starts to feel a little bit more like they are the character they're meant to be. And I think this is to do with, again, starting to put in the eyes, right? Thinking about, like, look, how big are these eyes going to be? And once we push the eyes out, like, yeah, we need to make this face a little bit bigger. So again, just roughing in, sketching, and I'm going slow. All right, let's think about where this sword goes. And this is tricky. I'm not going to draw the actual sword because I think the design changes, and I don't have the exact design on me, and I don't want to draw and mix across the streams and get old swords mixed up with new character designs. But yeah, let's see if we can make this feel more like a video game sword. So video game swords are bigger than normal swords, especially when we're dealing with a cartoony, right? Look, but yeah, big old sort of medieval sword. Let's make this a bit bigger too. Boom, boom. Yeah, there we go. Starting to come together. Now there's a lot of little cool details here that I think we can sort of begin to add. Now, a big part of understanding your process, I think, is really understanding where you're going to add this kind of detail. So we've got a couple of things here that I think are really key. We've got the fact that this rope seems braided. We've got all these little bits of detail on the belt. We've got this pattern here. We have all of the details of the boots. You know, we got things like the hair. So the question is kind of, look at what stage do you do that? Do I leave that for next? Do I rough some of that in here? How do you handle all of those concepts? So a good way to break it down is to understand that in general, things that are going to need structure or construction are useful to add earlier on. So I'll just swap for a pencil that isn't blunt. And let's look at this, for instance. I've got... Right, let's take this back a little bit because we've got a bit of junk going there. Boom. 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 So we're getting a bad tangent here with this sword. That's a bit annoying. So look at how we might solve that. Maybe just move this thing at the back down a little bit. Should have thought of that. Okay, anyway, got this thing. Right, so it's kind of coming out at the same direction. And there's 2 rows of these triangles. And what I'm going to do is just rough in the basic pattern. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is where, like, if you find, like, I'm sort of like, oh, does that fit? Is that 4 fit? I don't know. And again here. So it's kind of covered up by the sword. But basically we're going to have this shape here. Now, again, putting that in at this phase, I think is a really good idea, as is this little detail here. Got a detail there. And also just putting in, I would say, indication of where these details on this bit of the costume are going to be. Other things that I think are really useful to consider are all of these little straps on the boot. And there's a really good breakdown for how this functions that you can look at on this sheet, actually, which is why all this stuff exists. You need to kind of understand, like, how this is working if someone's going to model it in 3D. So these are really, really cool designs, super functional. And yeah, you can kind of see there. And that really answers all the questions I have about this, right? It's like, oh, how does this work? How does that work? Yeah, so understanding the structure is just a matter of breaking it down, right? So if we think about it from a structural drawing point of view, we've got a cylinder for the boot, and then we've got like a foot shape that's sort of cutting in there. Now you'll notice that this strap here is coming all the way down kind of to the heel, and we've got one point where it crosses over. So again, basically 2 other points where it crosses over. And that's the most important thing, is to track the center line. Where do these things cross over? Boom. And then also looking at where they cross over on the side, which is kind of the side of the boot. And then it's more or less like, it's kind of boring if you mess it up. But in most cases, just getting this geometry right at the structural stage will do most of the work. Now then, obviously we've got this thing coming up here. We've got a little cross stitch above here. So we can tell, okay, that comes up above there. We've got a cross here. Boom. And then these things kind of pop out the sides. Now, I probably wouldn't design boots like that for a comic book. That would be a bit of a pain to draw again and again. But, you know, for a video game, you do this all day. So then we've got this tie at the front, right? And this comes down here, creating negative space here. And then this is going to come along here. Make this all a bit darker. and we've got a bit of stuff on the heel, and then essentially 1, 2, 3, right? 1, 2, 3, and they're a bit compressed. So these are just things I'm sort of keeping in mind, right? And then we've got these classic Hyrule, Link, Zelda triangle motifs. Alright, so that's kind of like going to be what we're trying to do here. And yeah, it's just a matter of trying to find all those points, right? So I'm going to do the same thing, but this way we're going to do it proportionally. So let's get right the top of this boot, and you know, to me that feels like it probably has to be there, right? Maybe I'll move this down a bit and out a bit so that we get a slightly better, I mean, it's not a great tangent with the sword, but maybe that gives us a bit of a better one. So yeah, this kind of has to come up here. Transfer that line over there. That has to kind of come up there. Make sure, again, just double check my perspective. It'd be good to hold this up at an angle. Can't be bothered right now. That'll probably come back to bite me. And you can see again, there's this sort of big space here on the design. Let's move this a bit closer so we can kind of reference it easily. So again, just sort of visually massing in these shapes can be really useful, because what I have to do is then kind of say, okay, well, underneath that, if I have one crossover point here, I'm then going to have one crossover point here, and then another one somewhere down below, right? And yeah, it's really a matter of trying to space these things. So this is where a lot of drawing is just going to come down to basic proportion. Let's get them, and I'm just like, yeah, just sort of feeling it out, like, yeah, I feel like a little bit lower is going to be good. So the more you do this, the more, I guess, appetite you have for crazy amounts of silly lines going everywhere. But as I said, what I'm trying to do here is track the side. All right, so track the side, and here I've got one crossover. All right, comes over here. All right, we've got another crossover there. All right, that's going there. All right, that's going there. And then I'm going to have, right, this crossover here. So it's basically geometry. And that seems to tuck under there for some reason. Then we're going to have, again, this cross here. So this is all just stupid rough drawing, right? It's just like, you got to do a lot of work. If you just go through it right, and if this is design, you have to draw a whole bunch of times, like you'll get used to it, right? But it's often interesting the degree to which structural drawing can help us, even if we're drawing very cartoony things. Right, drawing this comes up here. We got this line coming over there. Got this line coming here. Right, so all of that comes over here. Then we've got this line here. 1, 2, and then this is where like even small little things can really mess you up, because this obviously connects up a bit further. Right, bump, bump. And that means this can come around here, connect up here, and then I get my better spacing. 1, 2, right. So much of drawing is just these little things. Proportion, proportion. Boom. Right. Get on the center. Boom, boom. Right, job done. Then we can step back and be like, oh, does it work? Do we need to, or do I need to delete it all? Who knows? So yeah, again, this one's wrapping all the way around there. And we can see that this, right, does kind of start here. So there is this crossover there. And if we go back to this, oh, if we go back to this, it will give us a pretty good indication of exactly what's happening with all those sort of wraparound things, which is super useful, right? So you can see again, there's the idea that here we've got this kind of hook, and this is going in there. Boom, boom. All right, let's do that again, and let's try to do it a bit faster, right? We got that hook, got one, right? It's going to cross over. It's then going to come down here. Right, boom, boom. If we were to see here, right, transfer that over, we're going to have our little cross. Boom, 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 boom. Just getting that shape design right. All right, what else do we got? So here, okay, we got this one. This comes here. Got the sole. Here, that's going to come over there, and yeah, we're probably not going to see a lot of this extra detail, but that's fine. We don't necessarily need to. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah. So again, that gives us a pretty good frame. Okay. So what I normally like to do is just play around with a kneadable eraser. I'm just going to take back some of this stuff. Now there's a multitude of ways we can do this. Boom, 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 boom. Some people like to kind of roll it. I like to dab it because I feel like it gives me more control. I feel like sometimes I want the sketchiness, sometimes I don't need to add too much to the original drawing. You know, it's kind of okay. Sometimes we do. Yeah, this is going to be a sketch. It's not like, you know, finished, polished lines. If I was doing this for a comic book, I'd probably take this phase and then just do the finished kind of ink lines or, you know, final lines over the top of this, right? That's kind of all I'm going to need. But in this case, yeah, this is about structure. So with these boots, I'm like pretty much, I think they're mostly going to be done. Although it's good to kind of think about adding some texture, right? So this is where once you've got the structure there, it's a lot easier now to add texture. And that's often what will, you know, sell it in the end. All right. Get rid of that line. Let's see if we can get this line a little bit cleaner. And yeah, now we'll just go through and basically add detail. So again, where do we start? Think about, I always think a good place to start is in the foreground. So I'm still going to view this as more or less a single item, and I'm going to draw some crosses in the middle. This is not necessarily, like, again, a super structural way of doing it. The reason for that is just that it's so small. It's going to be hard for me to go in there and actually draw all these things, so I'm going to go a little bit more iconic with it. Right, so here we can think about what's happening with this top here, and we can see that, again, there's a variety of costume details that are going to really play in here, but I'm just going to keep it pretty simple. And again, we can sort of feather in some of these changes. Boom, boom. So again, this looks a little bit sort of weird to me, exactly how that sort of costume is. It's kind of sitting, but I'm mostly kind of looking at that reference. Right, let's get a bit of this anatomy sorted. Draw those pectoral muscles. I feel like we might not need, or maybe that center line is a little bit off. So keep refining. And we also have to think about adding this weird thing he has on his arm. So I might leave that till last. All right, here, let's put some shade here. Again, having an idea of where the anatomy is underneath is really useful, because that means that we can, you know, think about adding a little bit of extra shading, a little bit of extra form, and it can really help us to understand that, where those lines will go. So again, we can represent this with a little bit more sophistication, or we could keep it, you know, very sort of structural, completely up to you, the artist, the master of this world. Now there's 3 little buttons here, or little beads or whatever. So I'm going to put in the middle one first, because that is a good structural drawing axiom. Right, if we just put in those main ones, everything else will kind of work out. Boom, boom, boom. And again, let's work the shadows here, put some shadows underneath here. This I feel like is probably good enough for our purposes. Again, we can accentuate these by thinking about the shadow a little bit more. Now I'm going to add some tone to this top. I think there's actually a bunch of patterns on it, so we'll have a look at those in a minute. Boom, 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 boom. Get rid of that. Think about, where's this center, this sword. Let's see if we can get rid of some more of this stuff. Use a ruler for this if you want, hey. It's totally fine. Boom. Boom. Alright, think about what's happening with this hand. I'm gonna I'm gonna not do too much structure here. Okay. We've got this arm. How much of this musculature do we want to draw? It depends. Again, you know, we want lean but not, you know, sort of super jacked. All right. So again, you know, you can see that's basically how I would sort of go with most of those details if we think about putting in some tone for these pants. Right. And then maybe we can add a little bit more shadow or tone for where there might be a shadow there. Now let's look at some of the extra details here, see what we're missing. Okay, so we got a cool little flourish here, which again we could probably avoid, but in a similar way I think these little things are really good to practice from a structural drawing point of view, because again they give us insight into how we might go about this. All right, 1, 2. So we kind of have some little blocks coming here. And again, let's shade in the rest. Mostly just for clarity, right? Again, it's just construction drawing, but we'll probably have those bangs come over there, or whatever they're called, giant sideburny things. Bump, 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 bump. There. So again, yeah, kind of sorting most of that out. Let's look at this arm as well. I feel like this arm is another area where it feels exceedingly complicated, and I don't have a really good view of it here. But what I'll try and do is think about where these marks will be. And similar to this, I think if we try and break it down a little bit, we might have a go. It's just, okay, breathe deeply, because I know that there is a lot more sort of structure and logic to it. So I'll just try and get the general idea. All right, bump. And yeah, I forget what happens. That I think there is some sort of thing around the elbow. But the point is, what we're doing here is really thinking about one cylinder that is the arm with another sort of larger cylinder wrapped around it. So that's really what we're trying to do, is find these. And I think drawing through, which I haven't been doing quite enough, is probably a good way to handle that. There's a little bit of wobbly drawing. What we should be doing is draw through, and then as we get down to the wrist, weird stuff is happening. Boom. And then we've got obviously the sort of tattoo pattern over the top that I'm just going to kind of fudge in there, here and there, because we don't have a great view of it on this particular model / set of reference. Boom. Alright, let's get the general look going. And again, we can't really see a lot of this hand. You can see this one, but yeah, not seeing a lot of this. Again, we're going to have marks on there. But again, we have to understand the limitations of the pencil, right? I don't have heaps of detail here. It doesn't necessarily fit with the rest of the style to go crazy. But yeah, again, maybe see if I can break that down another time. All right. So here we've got most of this proportion to me seemed okay. I think we just need to go in there and add a bit more stuff. So let's think about the nose. So I'm just going to draw the underside of the nose. We've got the mouth pretty much placed, so I'm just going to add a little bit more detail to it. The eyes, however, I didn't really put in there. So I'm just going to put them in. I'll make these a little bit bigger than I normally would, right? See if we can get the vibe for that character. He's always got these kind of quite serious eyebrows, right? Which I think are important to add. And as I said, we've sort of got bonk, bonk. A range of different bits of hair. Right, and this is where what I really want to avoid doing is having to redo the face. So I'm just going to double check, right? Double check proportions, and I'll draw this line of the face when I'm looking directly at it, so I don't get that line off. Boom. Yeah, I think that's, let's make sure that, so that's center, that's where the center of that's going to be. Yeah, cool. I feel like that works. Let's put some shadow in there. Shadow in there. It really looks like this. It's going down. So yeah, cool. Boom. So yeah, that gives us a pretty good understanding of how those things might function. And yeah, look, I think we're pretty much done. I mean, let me know in the comments, right? You know, how you think it went. I had a little bit of a sketch around trying to draw the costume to get my head around it before I sort of did this one, but you know, as with most of these demos, I'm just trying to sort of piece it together as we go, you know, and then just talk about structural drawing. But yeah, I think that's probably all we can kind of squeeze out of this one for now. So let me know in the comments below whether you enjoyed this one, whether you got some information here. Again, you know, like I really like this design. I think it's a cool design. It's a cool little elements to practice. It's a little bit frustrating to draw repeatedly. I'm not sure how much of this I want to draw in a comic book again and again. But I think hopefully we've learned some things about, again, you know, how to handle some of these little details, right? Drawing things like these boots really just did my head in when I was, you know, starting out and trying to figure this out. So the most important thing with these situations, if you get a brief or something like that, you have to draw this kind of costume detail, is just breathe, right? Relax, take it one step at a time. And normally in my experience, again, if we kind of just break it down, it'll kind of work out well. But this is often why I'm sort of going on and on about these, basic sort of structural primary form things. Anyway, as I said, let me know what you think, whether you'd like to see other sort of Zelda characters. I really want to do some, again, traditional, more like a, sort of Zelda 3 style arts. Might do something that's in color. Might look at the face as well. So again, let me know if any of those ideas really kind of spark your interest. Let me know down below. Give us a like, etc. That stuff all helps. Other than that, we'll catch you around. Happy drawing.